Welcome everyone to the International Peace Foundation's Bridges Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace tour. My name is Andrew Hancock, one of the Deputy Superintendents here at Stanford, and I'll be your host for today's event. Now, I would like to welcome Stanford Superintendent, Mr. Malcolm Kay, to the stage for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. So good morning to you all, parents, friends and students. Good to see you all out there. We're delighted today to celebrate two landmarks in our school's exciting journey. Firstly, the official launch of our new Phase 2, and also to celebrate our Global Mentor Programme. As part of our Global Mentor Programme, we are joined today by esteemed Nobel Laureate, Professor Sir James Mirrlees. Sir James, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Stamford campus, and we enjoy having you with us. Thank you for being here with us today. As a school community, we continually strive to provide the best teaching and learning experiences so that each individual achieves more than they believe they can. Our commitment to this is reflected in the opening of Phase 2. Phase 2 has not only expanded our campus and learning facilities, but has actually integrated a host of features and technology that will rival, if not exceed, what can be found in top universities around the world. Last week, Mr. Kurt Wagger, the US Ambassador to Singapore, was at our school to mark the opening of Singapore's only Education USA Advising Centre in partnership with the US Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. To support our educational program and to help our students celebrate and develop life skills for the future, I'm proud to celebrate our Global Mentor Program. The program will give students access to global leaders like Professor Mirrlees in the fields of business, science, social enterprise, athletics, and the arts, to motivate and inspire them to excel and to succeed. Through our work with the International Peace Foundation, Bridges, Dialogues Toward a Culture of Peace, the series, will bring a number of Nobel Laureates to our school to speak, to interact, and to engage with all of our students. Today we are fortunate to have Professor Mirrlees with us, the 1996 Nobel Laureate for Economics. Professor Mirrlees is a leading economist and has taught at the prestigious universities of Oxford and Cambridge. He is now Distinguished Professor at Large at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, as well as the University of Macau, and the founding master of the Morningside College of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Professor Mirrlees will be giving us a short speech and engaging in a question and answer session with our students. We are honoured to have Professor Mirrlees with us as part of our Global Mentor Programme. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kay. We now welcome our guest of honor, Nobel Laureate of Economics, Professor Sir James Mirrlees.
Well, very nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I look forward to some interesting dialogue. I think this session is intended to come from both sides, so that your questions will be just as interesting, probably more interesting than the answers. You know, it's a curious experience standing up here because the theatre is remarkably dark. So there are ghostly presences out there. I have no idea how many you are. This is a very nice theatre. Anyway, I thought I'd just talk a little about particular issue, which I will perhaps put forward as something for you to think about, and maybe some of you might suggest answers. Prelude this by telling you, as you may know, that I was born in Scotland and brought up in Scotland, and I'm not the first economist to have been born and brought up in Scotland, but Adam Smith, who I was thinking of as the first Scottish economist, not only was born in Scotland, but he lived most of his life in Scotland as well. Although he was a great traveller too. One of the questions that Adam Smith set himself to answer, and it was one of the questions that led to the creation of the subject of economics, was why is water so cheap and diamonds so dear? Because water is obviously a lot more useful than diamonds. And I would want to add, actually water is more attractive than diamonds. So you can't say that in any sense water is more valuable, is less valuable than diamonds, and yet it costs a lot less. He gave the obvious answer. It now seems obvious, it probably didn't quite seem obvious then. But it had to do with scarcity. But particularly in Scotland, any of you who have been there may have noticed that it probably rains more than in Singapore. So there isn't any scarcity of water. And particularly in these days, you could pretty much have as much as you wanted. And of course, for that reason, it wasn't going to cost you very much because suppliers of water were rushing to provide it. Whereas diamonds were and remain very scarce. So there are only a limited supply of them in the whole world. He didn't explain why people want diamonds. Of course, they are somewhat attractive and more attractive to some people than others. Unlike later economists who have often suggested that actually people want diamonds because of the high price rather than because they're otherwise useful, but they have become more and more useful for a variety of special purposes. However, it's not that I'm so interested in that particular question, but another one that I think isn't quite so easy to answer, which is why jobs that are nicer to do, jobs that we might say were of better quality, tend to be better paid than jobs that are really hard work to do and very exhausting. And you know, a very important fact about low-paid jobs all over the world, and this is, I'm thinking of jobs in Britain particularly, is that people who do the sort of less pleasant jobs like cleaning the streets or collecting garbage don't live as long as people who do the nicer jobs, or the more exciting jobs, or the ones that you might be willing to do for very little pay. So I think there's a very interesting question of why people will be paid a lot more. You might think it was scarcity, it's something to do with it. But it reminded me of my own experience when, of course, when I was young, your sort of age, and of course, I'm sure you find it's true still that your father and mother want to know what you intend to do with your lives, what kind of job you're going to be looking for. I know you've mentioned this in one of the questions that's been suggested to me for later on. I said I wanted to become a university teacher and go and do research. They were actually quite cross because, particularly in Scotland, university lecturers weren't paid very much. They wanted me to be a doctor. That's what would be a nicely paid job. I don't think there's any question that it's harder being a doctor than being a university lecturer and doing what you really like doing, although being a doctor is rewarding in other ways. So it remains a wee bit of a puzzle why things are like that. Of course, when I said that scarcity obviously has a lot to do with it, what I had in mind was that perhaps anyone could go out and work at cleaning the streets, or some of the less pleasant jobs. But of course, I'm also thinking of jobs like being a plumber or repairing radio wirelesses and television sets, I should say, nowadays, or mobile phones, which can be quite interesting jobs, but do become very boring over a long period of time. And you would think, actually, and you must be aware of this, that you look at other members of your class, that ability is very widely spread. What was being mentioned was the purpose of Stamford School, which was very much to achieve more than you think you can. And that's a perfectly reasonable and realistic requirement, because there are a lot of very able people around. So I think one of the answers to inequality in the world is for more and more people to go to university, to go through a good school education. And then perhaps at last we'll get the highly paid jobs less highly paid. That's certainly something like that happened in the first half of the last century. Perhaps it can happen again. Anyway, these were just some preliminary remarks. As it turned out, by the way, of course, if you get a prize that's got money attached to it, then it turns out you can be quite well off in the end. But you can't try to get a Nobel Prize. It just happens.
Thank you, Professor Mirrlees. May I please take a seat, and in the chairs we welcome Mr. Diller and his students from our 11th grade class to join us on stage for a few questions. Please. We will now begin a question and answer session between Professor Mirrlees and some of our students. I would now like to introduce Mr. Diller.
My name is Ernie Diller, and I teach humanities to 8, 9, 10, and also I teach IB history to 11th grade. And these are members of the class of 2016 who have a few questions for you, sir. And Maria's first.
Good morning, Professor. Prize?
It's the time.
Sorry. Rather more surprised than I am at being asked that question. It's something that happens, that you get a phone call. You just get a phone call saying that from Sweden. You pick up the phone without any, in my case I didn't know that this was the day on which these messages come through for the Economics Prize. Even if I had known, it wouldn't have made any difference because I had no expectation of getting such a thing. A nice man came on the phone. I'd actually met him some years before, but I didn't really know him. And he said, "I think I have some good news for you." And then said, "You've been awarded the Nobel Prize with William Victory." He's a Canadian economist living in America. Like several of the, or maybe many of the other people who get Nobel Prizes, I hesitated, so that's kind of the answer. It's kind of a bit of a shock. But then, of course, I instantly thought, well, this is much more likely to be a trick than the real thing. So I said, well, you sound Swedish, that's possible, but how do I know that you're telling the truth? So he did, clearly this is something they expect, because there was somebody I really did know quite well in the room with him, so he put Professor Lindbeck on the phone and explained to me that indeed it was true. And was that all right, because they had the press standing outside the door and so he ran straight away. So yeah, that was quite exciting. But I calmed myself down very quickly. I was in my room in college. I was living in college in Cambridge at the time. And I set out to do what I'd intended all along, which was simply to go over to the economics department for my morning coffee and meet people. And then I didn't quite know when I bumped into people on my way into the building if I should say anything, but I thought, no, I'd just sit quietly. But by the time I got upstairs to the coffee room, the news had got out. It's surprising how quickly these things happen. And then I realized, wow, people said you liked what I'd done. And I think that's really the best thing. And then I realized there were going to be a lot of phone calls and emails and letters. And I didn't know what I was going to do about them all. So that's the bad side.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Professor.
Our next question is going to come from Max.
Hi, I'm Maximilian Hackel, half German, half Indonesian. So you spent many years in education. Do you have any words of advice for us when it comes to learning and just being the best that we can be?
So, could you just relax?
Do you have any advice for us when it comes to learning and just being the best that we can be?
Best thing.
Best that we can be.
So this idea that they want to be the best that the idea is that they want to be the best that they can be, and if you have any advice for them to fulfill that.
There's so many things one could say. But let me pick one particular thing out, which once you've got an eye on something you want to achieve, and so point one is that you better be trying to do something quite difficult. So, and it had better be meaningful as well, something that in some sense is really worth doing. That initially you actually don't quite see how you can achieve it. And the point I was really wanting to make is, at least in my experience, it's very important not to give up on this and to persist for, it could be years rather than hours or days. For me, that would be solving a well-expressed problem. Some things, I've already mentioned that there's a kind of random element in this. It does depend a lot on luck. The sort of way that luck comes in is that you may just think of what it is that you want to achieve. It just comes to you. It's always seemed to me that the hardest way to give advice here, the hardest point in all of this to give advice is, how do you find something to achieve? Some people are very systematic about it. I remember hearing that Paul Samuelson, who was the most admired economist when I was younger, who's now unfortunately dead, set about as a student, possibly even before he was a student, reading through the major economic journals from the beginning. And of course what he was doing was he was looking for things that were not problems that hadn't been solved, issues that hadn't been satisfactorily resolved. I was indicating one of these in my preliminary remarks. And then I suppose he set about trying to solve these problems. So for people in my kind of trade, being a university researcher, that's the sort of thing we try to achieve. But there are other very different kinds of things that you might set out to achieve. And clearly something else I would have to give as advice, and probably all your teachers and your friends would give you the same, is it's important that you choose the kinds of things that you're good at. Some people make the mistake of valuing most the things that they find hard to do. I think if they succeed in doing something that's really hard, they feel that's a great achievement. I remember thinking that was, in a sense, the problem of a number of my more senior friends and colleagues in economics, and why they didn't have good achievements. Because they didn't go for what economists call the comparative advantage, the area where they simply have a better chance of succeeding. So I think it's very important to choose that, but at the same time, somehow one's got to combine that with trying to do something that you're really going to enjoy the whole process of trying to achieve it. So there are two things that often pull in rather different directions. One, the kind of thing you're really good at, but it may not be the kind of thing you enjoy most. I just have to hope that you're lucky and that they're both the same, but if they're not quite the same, then you're going to have to compromise between these. Make sure you get something of each.
Great advice.
All right, thank you very much.
We do have time for one more question as we wrap up our first half of our program today, and the question's going to come from Elliot.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Elliot Arzel. I am half French, half American. In an interview you took part in, you stated that you always wanted to be a professor of mathematics. Why did you make the decision to go into economics?
Changed my mind. Although I have some mathematics friends who think that I pretty much did it. Anyway, And certainly there are a lot of economists who think I was really more a professor of mathematics than of economics. In Oxford, I was indeed professor of mathematical economics, which is close. I think I was right to change my mind. And reflecting a bit on what I was just saying in answer to the previous question, I think I really was torn between what I would really like doing and what I was best at doing. I was probably best at doing mathematics at that time, but I was getting bored with it. And also, of course, I was finding it harder, as one does, as you go on. There's a stage in life where mathematics seems nice and easy. It's just hard enough to be enjoyable. But once you get to the stage where it may take you some weeks really to understand something, it begins to be maybe a little painful. And maybe I shouldn't have run away from that. But once I started thinking about what is it really useful to do, when I was in my early 20s, it looked as though economics had a much better chance of being useful than mathematics. So that was actually one of the reasons for changing my mind.
All right, thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much for your input thus far. It's been a most interesting dialogue, and what an honor and a privilege to have yourself, the Nobel Laureate, here with us today as part of our Global Mentor Program. We will now take a short 5-minute break before we proceed to the second half of the program to allow more students to ask some questions, which will be our economics class. So I would like to thank Professor Mirrlees for the first half. Thank you. Okay, we will now also dismiss our 7th and 8th grade students so they can return to their classes. Parents and other VIPs, we invite you to stay, and you can join us for the second segment of this event. And guests in the balcony seating, if you would like to move down to the lower half of the theater, please feel free to do so now. We will now proceed to the second half of our program, where Professor Mirrlees will come back on stage to answer more questions from our students. May I now kindly welcome Professor Mirrlees back on stage. Now I'd like to introduce Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Hello, I'm Mr. Fitzgibbons, and I am the IB Economics teacher for these grade 11 students. We've been working for the past month and a half or so on economics, so they're just starting out their econ careers. And we're going to ask you a few more questions, starting with Maya.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Maya, and I'm Singaporean. I have a question for you regarding the consequences of globalization. Globalization has been especially good for the rich and for those working in industries that have cross-border relevance. Other than lowering the curtain of protectionism, what do you think countries can do, what can governments do to ensure that the people don't lose out to foreign competition?
Yes, okay. So, how long do you have? Of course, it's a controversial question, whether indeed globalization is particularly good for the rich. There's at least one, I think, very important sense in which that might not be right. At least over the very long run. I think the economic forces are all to move by globalization, to move more and more capital from the rich countries to the poorer countries. And what that would do is pull up wages in the poorer countries. At the same time, it puts downward pressure on wages in the richer countries will tend to create unemployment. So you either get unemployment there or you get wages going lower. And that includes everybody's wages, the wages of highly skilled people as well as the least skilled. So that's roughly speaking why it looks as though globalization helps the rich, because the people with a lot of capital, people who are already quite rich, are going to do quite well out of it, particularly in the richer countries. But of course, the flow of capital works that way. It's going to bring down how much you get, what return you get for your capital investment in the poorer countries, where at the moment you can get a lot in China, India, something, if you have the local know-how and do the right things. And globalization does help them a bit more, but immediately, but it's creating competition. So you'd expect competition to not be so good for the incomes of the owners of capital in the poorer countries. So on the whole, I think globalization is particularly helpful, maybe not immediately, but to the lower income countries. And indeed, I think we already have a situation where world inequality between people is not increasing, it's probably falling. Because you've got the Asian countries growing rich quite rapidly in varying degrees. And we may be moving into a period when really low-income countries like Timor-Leste in Asia, or the African countries, will at last begin the sort of economic explosion that is natural for countries where labor is cheap, and where at last they're beginning to get some good education. All of these things are happening. The improved education, for example, is really a result of globalization in some of its dimensions. So there are a lot of ways it helps. But I do nevertheless agree with part of this, that the sort of movement of free trade and free movement of capital, which is what globalization is, it doesn't help everybody. And but whether everybody benefits from it turns quite a lot on government policies. The most we can say, and why we think free trade is beneficial, is to say that freer trade, lower tariffs, less protection, makes it possible for everybody in any of the countries to be better off. But in order for it to happen, there actually has to be redistributive taxation and similar policies of some kind. It doesn't happen automatically, quite the contrary.
Thank you for that very insightful answer.
Thank you so much. And the next question is going to come from Ridwan.
Hi, I'm Ridwan and I'm from Indonesia, and my question is, how will the United States pay their debt in your opinion? And will other countries help them in the process?
How will
the United States pay their debt?
Oh, yeah. Write checks in dollars. That's actually okay up to a point. And America's been very successful in doing that so far. People all over the world are very happy to hold dollars. Of course, the reason you raised the question is because from time to time it's noticed there's a very large deficit, and Congress may be rather unwilling to let the government increase the debt level. And currently they pay the debt by increasing the debt, of course. And an interesting question, we can't sort this all out now, but it's entirely possible for the debt just to keep on increasing. People feel that this possibility shouldn't be mentioned. It must be bad. You ought to discipline countries, and countries like people ought to feel that they're going to have to pay back the debt eventually. But of course, the big difference between country and people is that the country intends to live forever, or until an asteroid strikes and we're all finished. Given that, it's entirely possible that they could not only keep the debt that it got, but that it could keep increasing. Of course, that can't happen for every country. On the other hand, if you think of one element of it, perhaps you can see that this makes sense. Money, currency. It's entirely possible for the stock of US dollars to keep increasing over time, and for all other currencies to do that too. And as people are getting better off, they will simply hold more currencies as well as a variety of other kinds of wealth. So the question is how to use this possibility suitably, but I think it's always going to be with us. So it won't be necessary to pay off all the debt, and maybe in fact not very much of it at all.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Our next question is going to come from Ernest.
Hello, Professor. My name is Ernest, and I'm from Spain. My question for you is, in all of your years of education, how do you maintain or increase your motivation?
Suppose it had been half the population. Then it would have seemed rather strange for only the people living in Scotland to vote on whether the rest of the United Kingdom should become independent of Scotland. I actually think that was a problem that nobody discussed, even in current circumstances, because polls said that the people in the rest of the United Kingdom, only about 15% of them were in favour of Scotland becoming independent. Quite a lot of don't knows, but more than the majority were in favour of Scotland not becoming independent. And yet, that preference by other people of not wanting to lose Scotland was not counted. So how can one bring that in? And that may be, you think maybe people in England should have had half a vote or a tenth of a vote. This is exactly the kind of question that economists like to think about, and the tools that have been developed within the subject of economics will let them think about. And it's the kind of question that is going to have to be answered. Probably will come up quite acutely in Spain or Catalonia. would like to have a vote over independence, but where, because there exists a constitution that says that Spain consists of certain defined territories, Catalonia could only become independent if there was a constitutional action of deciding whether or not it could become independent. And that could only be decided by the whole population. Well, again, this question of what are good rules for a constitution, although it's a question of political theory, it is, I must say, also the kind of question that economists like to think about. But economics, in narrow sense, doesn't seem to help to sort these issues out. But it might help on territorial disputes about islands that different countries dispute over. In that case, unlike the Scottish independence case, you could imagine actual monetary compensation being part of an agreement. You would think that where two countries disagree about who should have a particular territory, that if there are inhabitants of the territory, like Falkland Islands, then clearly they should have a say in this issue. But if there are no inhabitants, or essentially none, like the Jayu Senkaku rocks, then you would think that it might be a good idea to bring into the discussion the possibility of some transfers into one way or another. Analogous to the way you probably do some American history, that America has sometimes bought territory, like Alaska, quite a bargain. Why don't we have more of these kinds of arrangements of sorting out disputes? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Mirrlees, for your time today. We do have time for one more. Oh, we do. We have time for one more question. Fantastic. We've got one from Tina then. Please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tina. I'm Norwegian. My question is, what is one change to tax policy that you think any country could adopt? And what do you think the barriers to adoption are or could be?
I think you're asking me to think of a tax policy which very few countries have adopted, which nevertheless seems to be very strong. I think lower income tax for second and third earners in a household. How do you maintain or increase
The motivation.
motivation? Yeah.
Just have an issue with one of the microphones, so we'll swap
Thanks.
over with you. Perfect.
Right. Yeah, there are some areas where the economists ought to say. That's for psychologists. But of course, my motivation for saying that is because it's a hard question. And I think it's hard because there are so many different ways that will help to motivate people. So there's no simple thing. You can, I think I agree with Adam Smith and almost every economist in between, that paying people more for what they do is a very powerful method of motivation. But there are a lot of activities for which it may push you sort of in the wrong direction. Because as soon as you introduce pay, it's pay for something. Now, it may just be paid for turning up at work for the right length of time. And then you say, well, what does that motivate you to do? That motivates you to keep coming to the job, but it doesn't get the job done. Except, well, perhaps my reason for making that simple point is just to emphasize that morale in the other senses is just as important as financial rewards. That somehow you have to have acquired the sense that you owe it to yourself to do a good job. What makes it all more complicated is that doing a good job isn't just a simple thing. You could always imagine doing it even better. And trying to do a job too well may, for some people, be unwise. That's when breakdowns come sometimes. So one's got to just do a neat judgment. So there isn't any easy answer to that.
Thank you very much. We do have time for one more question from Luteville. I think we've got our microphone fixed here. So Luteville, please.
Hi, my name is Luteville. I'm from Singapore. My question is about the current cross borders. So there are a few current cross-border conflicts, such as the disputed waters of the Vietnam and China, and also the Scottish and UK separation. How can economics create an argument resolving this conflict?
Yeah, well, this, by the way, is no objection from me. Again, my answer is going to be, well, it's not an economic question, but a perfectly good question to raise. I think it's very important that one shouldn't keep narrowly within the sphere of the subject. And I think it is important to realise why it's not an economic question. I'll tender it not entirely. And then I'm going to want to say, but it can be rather valuable to bring economics in, not in the obvious way. I'll show you what I mean. Let's take the Scottish independence question. The way that is done is by having a vote. So voting is a method of resolving conflicts, conflicts of interest. It is a pretty good method. But it seems sort of obvious, apparently, in the Scottish United Kingdom independence issue, that there should be a vote by the people of Scotland. Let's say people resident in Scotland. I'm not one, so I wasn't voting or party to that. Seemed to me that if Scotland had been a larger part of the United Kingdom, it is something that could be quite a big effect. Roughly, what I have in mind is that I think tax rates, income tax rates on the first earner in a household, the main breadwinner, can be quite high without really discouraging work. In many countries, they are quite high once you add all taxes together. In Britain, for people in the middle of the income range, it can add up to over 70% tax on earning any extra income. And you wouldn't expect that to discourage people from wanting to work and work at a highly paid job. But this kind of thing really does discourage, often it's the wife who may not work. So it makes sense to maybe have a tax rate that could be half for the so that's one. I'm not saying it's the most important one, but it's just the one that occurred to me now.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Mirrlees, for your time today. We are honored to have you here, and as the only kindergarten grade 12 school in Singapore to host you, we feel quite honored. This has been invaluable for our students at Stanford, and may I now invite you to the front of the stage so that we can present you with a small thank you gift as a token of our appreciation. Mr. Kay and Mr. Uwe Morowitz, the founding chairman of International Peace Foundation, will you also please join us on stage, along with Mr. Fitzgibbons and Mr. Dillard. Okay, the gift that Mr. Kay is handing to Professor Mirrlees reads, Stamford American International School would like to extend a special thank you to Professor Sir James Alexander Mirrlees on October the 1st, 2014, in partnership with Bridges, Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace, International Peace Foundation. Let's give one more round of applause, please.
Okay, guys, just one last one all together. Ready? 1, 2, and 3. All here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all who made it to this event today. We are proud to sponsor the International Peace Foundation's Bridges, Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace series, and look forward to having 2 more Nobel Laureates visit later this year. So I'm pleased to invite our esteemed guests to leave now. I do have one more short announcement as our guests are exiting. We are looking very much forward to hosting 2 more Nobel Laureates visit later this year, and I want to share a little bit about the 2 of them that will be here. Next will be Prof. Aichi Negishi, the 2010 Nobel Laureate for Chemistry on January the 28th, 2015. He's from the Herbert C. Brown Lab of Chemistry at Purdue in West Lafayette, USA. After which, we will have Professor Ada E. Yonath, 2009 Laureate for Chemistry from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot, Israel. And she'll be joining us on March the 4th, 2015. Please save these dates. Please come and join us again. And thank you very much all for joining us today. Have a lovely rest of the day. Okay, students, make sure you take a look at your teachers and you can be dismissed with your teachers.